slowing down, but hello, everybody. Good evening, and thank you for attending Fighting the Right Lessons from Florida. I am really excited to be moderating this event that's been organized for Historians for Peace and Democracy and Massachusetts Peace Action. My name is Sarah Sklaw. Last year, I had the pleasure of organizing and researching with HPAD. HPAD is a wonderful organization of activist historians committed, to all the good stuff, anti-war, liberation, and also pushing the historical profession to be more politically engaged. We're so excited to be co-sponsoring this event with Massachusetts Peace Action, which is the Massachusetts affiliate of the national organization Peace Action, a national anti-war and anti-nuclear group, also pushing for, strong change. And I think what's really exciting in this case is pulling a lot of those threads together, Before we jump in with our wonderful panelists, who I'm so excited to get to moderate today, I can't help but doing a little bit of self-promotion. So I do want to highlight some of the work that HPAD has done around the culture wars in education over the past year or so. I'm also really excited to see some of our activist friends here, like there's an education project. So one of the things that Historians for Peace and Democracy has done is we have put together this archive of resources, just called the Culture Wars Archive, and it has really like hundreds, I say that because I linked a lot of them, hundreds of material articles and podcasts and materials to help folks both understand this really atrocious culture war against education in its various racist, anti-gay, and sexist iterations. We've also done with the Working with the Zen Education Project, we have launched Historians on Call campaign to provide support to educators who are under attack. And we are played an important role in a forthcoming and yet to be titled book. So I hope everybody keeps an eye out for that. Thank you all again for being here. I'm really excited to get right into it. We have two wonderful panelists tonight who are just going to really rock our socks off, I'm sure. So we have Paul Ortiz. Thank you. Paul Ortiz is a professor of history at the University of Florida and president of United Faculty of Florida at U of F. He is the author of an African-American and Latinx history of the United States. Thank you also to Sharon Wright Austin, a professor of political science at the University of Florida and author of a number of books and editor, including Race, Power, and Political Emergence in Memphis, The Transformation of Plantation Politics in the Mississippi Delta, The Caribbeanization of Black Politics, and editor of the forthcoming book, Political Black Girl Magic. So two fantastic experts here today who are going to speak both to the unique circumstances in Florida and then what that can teach us about what's going on nationally as well. We're going to have about 35-40-minute conversation among the three of us. And I ask you as the audience, if you have questions or comments as they come in, please throw them in the chat. We'll look at the chat, and then for about the last 15 minutes or so, I'll take some of your questions. But I want to thank both of the panelists again. I want to thank the organizers again, and I'm going to jump right into it. So I was hoping that you could both start us off by telling us about the current state of play in Florida. What legislation has been passed or introduced? How is it impacting teaching, research, and scholarship of you and your colleagues? And what have you and your collaborators been doing to fight back against this discriminatory legislation? Dr. Ortiz, you're unmuted, so do you want to start us off? And then Dr. Austin, can't wait to hear from you as well.
Well, first of all, I'm just so honored and humbled to be on yet another event with my dear colleague, Professor Sharon Austin, professor of political science and African American studies. Sharon and I have been on a lot of events together and a lot of great research projects together. And, I think I can't talk for Sharon, but I think what drives both of us is the amazing students at UF in Florida that we work with on an everyday basis. And we really feel, I feel as the president of our faculty union at UF that we've been successful insofar as we've never defined academic freedom narrowly. Of course, we're a union and we're there to defend our members, and we have a collective bargaining agreement. And Article 10 of that collective bargaining agreement is really the capstone and the gem, the academic freedom article. And it's really why Governor DeSantis has come after us with both barrels blazing. But be that as it may, we've always defined academic freedom as something encompassing our broader communities of struggle, our students, the radical traditions that we come out of, Chicano studies and Black studies, and these generations of freedom fighters who built our institutions, and our fields. In terms of the actual pieces of legislation, without getting too much in the weeds, I'll just mention a few of them. One of them we have actually been able to put a temporary stop to, and that is the so-called Stop Woke Act. We have a temporary injunction against the Stop Woke Act. I start with that because I really want to highlight again the importance of solidarity, the support of many of you who we know and just love, and thank you for your support, and the many people who have been speaking out against the Stop Woke Act. The reason, though, that the federal court issued a temporary injunction against the Stop Woke Act is because so many people have spoken out against it. And that's something that we really highlight as a union, is if we don't speak out against these things, then silence equals consent. And the federal judge, Judge Walker, when he issued that temporary injunction against the Stop Woke Act, he basically said the same thing. He said, if no one was speaking out against this, if racism no longer exists, then it's fine. But the state has to prove racism doesn't exist, and it can't prove that by stopping discussion about racism, right? But because of the fact that so many people spoke out in favor of critical race theory, in favor of gender studies, in favor of an uncensored Black studies, I believe that was the key behind the temporary injunction, which is still holding pretty firm. Two other pieces of legislation, many of you probably know about House Bill 999. And that's the nuclear bill, which essentially, again, borrowing from Massachusetts Peace Action. And I want to thank you for co-sponsoring with HPAD, just really honored to be part of this. But HB 999, in its original iteration, is really an attempt, again, to shut down what now they call critical theory, which they mean they want the state, the people supporting HB 999, want to stop actually discussions of oppression or social movements. They really want to disempower people. I think that's the really key to understanding. They want to shut down gender studies. They want to shut down a critical race theory. They want to take away the right of people to be able to critically assess the problems in our society. And, as a scholar who draws on people like C.L.R. James, like W.E.B. Du Bois in the radical Black tradition, my analysis is this isn't just statewide, this is nationwide and even worldwide. There's a connection here between what's happening in Florida and what's happening in France and what's happening in New York, and these efforts to discipline and control people's thinking and to limit the power of working people to fight back. The last bill I'll mention here, and really it's the key to everything. And I'll put, Sarah, when I'm finished, I'll just put an action bar for those who want to speak out against these bills. The last bill is SB 256, and that's really the most important one in my opinion. That's the anti-union bill. That's the bill that DeSantis really wants to pass because he understands that the Stop Woke Act and HB 999 cannot be successful as long as we have a collective bargaining contract at all of our universities. All of the universities in Florida are unionized. Many of our colleges are unionized. And our academic freedom articles are the gem of each of our contracts because so many of our colleagues came from Latin American dictatorships. Like one of the founding presidents of our union here in Gainesville, Hernan Vera, many people will recognize him. He was a world-renowned scholar in comparative race and ethnicity. His family barely escaped from Pinochet's Chile. Many colleagues that founded our union in the early 70s were refugees and sons and daughters of refugees from Nazi Germany. And so what they passed down to us in my present generation is Florida is like Germany 1930. That's what many of the founders who are still around often will say. And so SB 256 is a bill designed to try to decertify our unions, trying to do all sorts of things, like trying to prohibit us from dues deduction from our paychecks, trying to decertify us if we go under 60% membership, which is a challenge in a right to work state. And it's also trying to stop the union from being able to talk to any member while they're on their respective campuses. There's a carve out for the police and the firefighters. And I think we all know why the police are exempt from this, because Governor DeSantis, again, is going after education unionists. And he realizes that as long as we're standing together and as long as we have solidarity and collective bargaining agreements and the support we have, he can't eliminate things like critical race theory. He can't really eliminate gender studies. Those are some of the bills right now, Sarah, that are kind of being debated right now. And I'll put, again, the action tracker for those that want to speak out against those bills. I'll just put that in, I'll drop that in the chat bar.
And I just want to quickly say, I think Paul gave a really good summary, but I wanted to just say that really with what's happening now, Paul mentioned the Stop Woke Act, HB 7, HB 999, and then also the 256 that is targeting unions. But really, this is a part of a larger effort. And really, in hindsight, now that all this is happening now, I think about things that even were happening years ago at UF and just in general at our state, and we really shouldn't be surprised by this. So I mean, I remember even years ago when I was the director of African American Studies, and Paul and I and a group of faculty had worked together because we wanted to have a graduate certificate in race and ethnicity, and we worked on it for 2 years. And we were being led to believe that this was going to be a reality. And then right when we were getting ready to submit it, they told us that we couldn't. And I think the excuse that they gave us was that African American Studies wasn't a department and we couldn't do it. And then I also was involved in another situation with two of my colleagues, Dan Smith and Mike McDonald, when we were expert witnesses for a voting rights case that challenged SB 90, which was a very oppressive law that was many provisions were later struck down because of racial discrimination, especially against African Americans and Latinos. And we were told we couldn't be expert witnesses. Without those expert witnesses to write the reports and do the research, it's impossible to prove voting discrimination. And we were able to sue and we were able to get the policy changed. We were able to serve. But all of that was happening then, the book banning in the state, and then the opposition to the AP African American History course, which would have been an elective, by the way, wouldn't have been required. And now with the Stop Woke Act, which pretty much dictates the way that you talk about race. If you have to talk about race in such a way as if you can't say that any particular group of people oppressed any other group of people because of their race. And so the language is so vague that it really just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And as Paul mentioned, that was something that the ACLU, the NAACP, and a group of civil rights organizations challenged in a lawsuit, and I'm one of the plaintiffs in that lawsuit. We have a preliminary injunction, and I remember when we got that victory, which says they can't enforce it, Governor DeSantis was saying that, oh, well, yeah, they won at this liberal judge, but once it gets to the 11th Circuit, the appellate court, it'll be overturned. Well, it wasn't. Even the conservative court upheld the preliminary injunction. Now, they haven't made a final decision, but that still is good news for us. And we're ready for HB 999. It hasn't become law yet. Let's hope that it won't. We're keeping the pressure on them. And I want to commend Paul Ortiz and so many others who are leaders in our union. And if, as he said, if it wasn't for, in answering your question, how are we fighting back? If it wasn't for the union, the support that they gave us with the expert witness situation, the supports that they're giving the students, even our students are unionized, our graduate teaching assistants are unionized, and that's a good thing. If it wasn't for that, who knows where we would be. But Florida is a model for the state. because a lot of people even are asking me, well, why are you there? If I were you, I'd just get another job, I'd just leave. Well, it's not that simple. First of all, you can't just sell your house and pack your kids and everything and just leave your home. That's the first thing. But the second thing is Florida is a model for the nation because the governor has written a book. And he's saying that if you elect me as president, the things that I'm trying to do in Florida, I'm going to do it nationwide. At least I'm going to try to. So, and it's not just Florida. This is something that's happening everywhere. So the way that we're fighting it is by, luckily we're unionized here and working with our union. And then also with our case, with the case against Stop Woke, we're asking for friend of the court briefs from organizations, especially from student organizations. So if any of you know of anyone, or if you yourself are willing to write a friend of the court brief to say that you oppose the Stop Woke Act, because it's obvious. And this is the last thing I'll say, because I know, we have a lot of people going to ask questions, but it's obvious this is all building upon each other. Like HB 7, first of all, said, okay, when you talk about race, you have to sort of water it down. You can't talk about critical race theory. You can't talk about intersectionality, which is a theory that I'm using in my upcoming book, that in which Black women and women of color talk about the racism and sexism and the intersection of those discriminations that they experience. You can't talk about that. And first of all, you can't do that. You can't tell people that and if you do talk about it, you have to water it down so much that the language really makes no sense. And so that was the first thing. Now with 999 is basically retaliating. And I think the goal of that is to retaliate against people like Paul and I, who are tenured professors, full professors, who are able to speak out, because I have so many colleagues who are untenured who say to me, I'd like to be involved, I'd like to participate in panels, but I can't because I don't have tenure. And I understand, why they do that. And that's why Paul and I take the time to do things like this. But that HB 999 is building upon HB 7. HB 7 wants to prohibit the way that we teach. HB 999, among other things, as far as getting rid of diversity and DEI just initiatives just in general, but it also is a form of retaliation. It's designed to try to silence people who have tenure, because one of the things that it'll do is it'll make, at any time, they could call up anyone and say that, hey, okay, yeah, I know you've written these books and these articles and you've done these things, but we're going to try to provoke your tenure. They would have the power to even do something like that. And then the next legislation is to attack the unions, to say that to the unions, okay, yeah, you guys have been really successful in mobilizing people, but now if you continue this, you're breaking the law, and we're going to now address you. So really, when you think about history repeating itself, I definitely would never compare what's happening now to things that happened in the 30s and 40s, but it still kind of makes you think about just the things that we've learned. And some of you are old enough to have lived through some of these things. And it's a scary thing. Once you start allowing people to deprive you of your rights and freedoms, where do you stop? So I just stop there.
No, that was wonderful from both of you. So I want to jump off of this, and I have this question about language. So there's been a lot of different types of language and vocabulary used to describe, this legislation, the larger movement, the broader campaign. And, it's been everything from Christopher Rofo and anti-CRT to the culture wars and what are the sort of advantages or shortcoming of that, or the governor's sort of anti-woke and this like total distortion of woke as terminology. And we also know at the same time, that this legislation is super attached and tied to attacks on queer people and trans people and reproductive rights. So this is not just like a semantic question, like what should we call it? Because it's the best thing, but I want to know, what language do you find most effective for analyzing and building coalitions against these efforts? And Dr. Austin, if you would start us off, because you sort of had a language hook in your answer.
I would say, as far as the language, the main thing that I always have told people, or that I'm telling people when they ask, well, how can we help? How can we educate people about what's going on? Somebody just posted fascism. I would definitely agree with that. But also, I think it's bullying and intimidation. That's a nicer way of putting it, but it's designed to try to control the way things are, or the way that you talk about race. And I really take offense to it, especially considering my own personal experiences as someone who went to school many years as a Black woman, and being one of the, if not the only student of color, only Black student, and there are so few Black students even on our campus. I think now, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like 4.9%. And the numbers are lower now than they were when I came here over 20 years ago. I came here right after One Florida went into effect, which pretty much said that you can't consider race when deciding whom to admit. So, I mean, the language that I would use is that this is bullying, this is intimidation, this is just history repeating itself. This is designed to try to silence people, to let people know that if you don't follow along, if you don't toe the line, we can punish you, we can do things to destroy you. And that's why it's important for us to continue to participate in discussions like this, and also to sort of advertise what's going on in the state, because if more people know about what's happening in our state, it's going to be much, much harder for our political leaders to be able to do this. And then also, I have to say this, I'm really disappointed in our administration, because I would at least hope that they at least would issue a statement saying that we are supportive of diversity and equity and inclusion. Even if they don't mean it, you would think they would at least do it, but I haven't seen it. Now, maybe it's just me, but I have not seen anything from the administration. I think people are so afraid of Governor DeSantis and the fact that he openly retaliates that they aren't going to say anything. So I would just advise people to continue to keep up with what's going on by looking at the websites of the ACLU, the NAACP, the League of Women Voters, because those are just some of the plaintiffs that have come together to challenge Stop Woke and are ready, if HB 999, hopefully it won't become law, but if by chance it does, they're ready to file a lawsuit to challenge that legislation too.
Wonderful. Paul, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I wanted to build on something, and I'm actually going to drop another link in the chat bar, because this goes directly to what Sharon led us off on. I mean, Sharon Austin refused to be a victim when the University of Florida said you cannot testify in a voter suppression case. Sharon and two of our other colleagues here went on the offensive and said, stop us. And in a climate where so many people were reacting, rightfully so, it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be fearful, because we do live in fearful times. But what Sharon and her colleagues, our colleagues, did with the lawsuit against the state of Florida was essentially to say, we're tired of this. We're fed up. We're going to fight back. And I want to connect this with the fight backs that are happening all across the country. So yesterday, Sharon and I, our union, United Faculty of Florida, passed a resolution and voted to send a solidarity contribution to 9,000 striking workers at Rutgers University. And it's not a huge amount, it's not a huge donation, but I put the link in there because it has a link to the Solidarity Strike Fund at Rutgers that anyone here can contribute to. We know, I'm also a labor historian, and so one of the fastest growing sectors in terms of union growth right now is in higher education. Now, why is that, you may ask? And that's just an open question, but I think it's connected, Sarah, to your question to us that kind of frames this evening's event. As educators, we are in a strategic position in the capitalist economy. We're not exactly like auto workers were in Flint, Michigan in 1936, but I would argue that we are in a key position at the commanding heights of the capitalist system. And without going into too much Marxist theory, I want to also suggest that there is a split in the American ruling class right now. There are people in the American ruling class who again, alluding to what Professor Austin said earlier, why doesn't President Biden issue at least a token statement in support of DEI? Because we know many of his corporate sponsors support diversity, equity, and inclusion in a token kind of manner, right? Every corporation now has a DEI chapter or a DEI division or a DEI statement. So what does Governor DeSantis have against that? And that's what I think is getting at the bottom of this kind of split within the American ruling class. What's happening down in Florida, in addition to the legislation aimed against us, is anti-immigration legislation. anti-labor legislation. The state is constantly trying to roll back whenever a county in Florida passes a higher minimum wage ordinance or any like affordable housing ordinance, the state of Florida fights back right away. And they have the support of the Florida Chamber of Commerce, the landlords associations, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really tied to a struggle within capitalism that's going on everywhere. I mentioned in the beginning, in France, workers trying to hold on to their pensions and retirement system. The demands here to abolish Social Security are growing again and again. And I think these things are all connected, you know, kind of taking a panoramic view of these things. But the people who are stopping these terrible things from happening right now, Sharon mentioned ACLU, NAACP, higher education unionists. It's no shock that we're under attack because as small as we are, and I wish we were much, much, much bigger, but as small as we are, it turns out that we're pretty impactful. And it turns out that we really frustrate these people in power. They really do despise us. We've been in Tallahassee 24/7 fighting these bills. And when a union person walks down the hallway and runs into one of these DeSantis supporters, one of these DeSantis legislators, oh my God, they get all red in their face. They get angry. They, you know, you people are still here, you know. But that's what what I think we need to emphasize tonight is the fight backs that are happening and Rutgers in Florida, all across the country. The mainstream media don't want us to think about the fight backs, do they? They want us to think of ourselves as victims. Governor DeSantis will be very happy if we all retreated into our individual shells. We lived alienated lives. We let the state run amok over us. And there's a lot of corporate media outlets. I hate to say this, but it's the truth. And you all know I'm right. The Wall Street Journal would love to anoint Ron DeSantis as Donald Trump's successor. They really would love to do that. They framed him as the reasonable alternative to Donald Trump. Well, he's really showed how reasonable he is, hasn't he?
Awesome. So I'm like so torn because on the one hand, I want to ask about this moment and what is it about this moment? And on the other hand, I'm like, people want practical information that they can use. So I'm going to ask sort of about alliances and how alliances have been built. So how have professors on your campus connected their activism to the work of students, staff, and educators across the like strata of education? So down from the pre-K and kindergarten and elementary school level through middle and high school and into, you know, both undergraduate and this incredible wave of graduate organizing as well. How has the sort of alliance building across those different, often very siloed areas worked? And you can also talk about some of the challenges there. You know, we don't need to act like everything is always peachy, whichever, and high school students, absolutely. So either one of you can start that.
Well, I'll just make a real short intervention here because this, as many of our local struggles and resistance movements, insofar as they're successful, Sharon Austin is often a centerpiece of those movements. And so I'm going to drop another link in the chat bar. On February, folks may remember this, but in February, we had a statewide walkout in support and solidarity with African-American studies. And in response to this effort by DeSantis in the state of Florida to ban the advanced placement African-American studies curriculum. And on that day, and I'm really proud to say that the faculty union, you know, literally within minutes of finding out that the Dream Defenders in Florida, the Dream Defenders are a critical part of the Black Lives Matter movement. Within minutes of finding out that they were organizing a statewide action in support of Black studies, we signed on immediately and said, what can we do as faculty unionists? And so one of the things that we kind of dug into that toolkit of the third world liberation struggle, of the anti-war movement in Vietnam, of the anti-nuclear peace movement is we can hold a teach-in. And so we actually organized a 3-hour teach-in at the University of Florida. We titled it Can't Ban Us, Day of Action, Black History Teach-Ins in Florida and Beyond. Sharon Austin was one of our keynote speakers. She talked about the history of Black studies, why it's under constant siege. So that's one example that I wanted to share with you is, we need to be where our students are. We need to be in touch with the traditions of our disciplines, which is that, it wasn't middle bourgeois kind of people that created Black studies. It was people in the streets, people in the movement. And so we've tried to kind of keep those traditions going, and especially be in solidarity with our students.
Yeah, and I was also able to participate in a teach-in at the New College of Florida last week. And that school has really been, the target of DeSantis' vitriol. They kicked out the president, and it has a reputation of being a really progressive. It's a beautiful campus. I'd never been there before, but it's a school that I could tell the students have a lot of pride in their school. It's a small campus, relatively progressive. And they pretty much have tried to just get rid of the administrators and pretty much change the entire character of the school and convert it from being this liberal progressive institution to having like a lot of DeSantis cronies and make it more of a right wing, not even so much right wing, but ultra right wing, ultra conservative type of institution. So we had a teach-in there just to talk about some of the things that are happening in the state. And I was there, another UF professor was there, and they had professors from all over Florida, and I was very impressed, especially by the students that I met. And then also, book banning is a big problem for. I have a good friend who's a second grade teacher, and she said that at her school they had to take all the books off the shelf. And she said there was one book that they found it objectionable because it was some kind of a book about a cat. It's a children's book about a cat, and they said the cat wasn't wearing any clothes. And I was like, "You got to be kidding me!" When she was like, "Really? It has gotten that ridiculous?" I was like, "Wait, what?" So I mean, the book banning is a big problem for K through 12 just in general. And I've noticed, like, one of my friends was saying that we should just maybe. My children are teenagers now, but I still have a lot of their books, like from when they were kids, and maybe just collect books and just give them out to kids, because some schools don't really have books on the shelves because of all this foolishness that's going on. And so again, that's why it's important to have solidarity. It's important to fight this, because who would ever have thought that something like this will happen? But when you have a governor that's a demagogue that just thinks he can just bully people around and he can get away with it because I guess he can frighten people, who knows how far he'll go if we let this go.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. One note to folks in the audience if you have questions specifically, please write them in the chat so I can pull them. I've got a couple lined up. And then I think, this is such a multi-pronged fight where you've got your unions, you've got your public action, and then clearly there's also legal action that's taking place. And so, Dr. Austin, you've mentioned that you were a plaintiff in this lawsuit challenging the Stop Woke censorship law. Can you tell us specifically about that experience? What motivated you to join the legal action?
I was invited to join because I've been an expert witness in some voting rights cases. So I work with a lot of the civil rights organizations, especially the ACLU and the NAACP. And because the situation with myself and my two colleagues got so much media attention, I think some people were already familiar with the battle that I had already fought for academic freedom because of the expert witnessing ban. So I was invited to participate. There are 8 plaintiffs. The title of the case is Pernell versus Lamb, and I can't really go into the specifics, but I can talk about things that are already online, especially if you look at the NAACP's website and the ACLU's website. They have the actual lawsuit, the ruling by Judge Mark Walker, and the more recent ruling by the 11th Circuit, both of which found and upheld the preliminary injunction. We are arguing that it's a violation, of course, of the First Amendment, because you're basically telling people the way that they're supposed to speak about race. And I guess the preference is that we not speak about race at all, because one of the things that the governor said in one of his press conferences was that he hoped that if he removes all the diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, that DEI would just wither on the vines. So, and that's a quote from him. So the objective is for us to not talk about race at all. But I was invited to participate as a plaintiff, and I was just asked to speak about my experiences, what my perception of HB7 was, what it meant, And one of the things also that we're arguing in the lawsuit is that we think that this will have a disproportionate impact, especially on minority professors, but especially on Black professors, the few of us that there are. And so I think that that is the one thing with, at least with me, when I earned my doctorate from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, it was in American government, and I never had an African-American studies course or even a Black politics course because it wasn't offered, but that's what I mostly teach now. And so professors like myself are hired to teach these courses. This is not something that, we do it because we like it, we choose to, but it's because we signed a contract, we were invited to do this. And then to say to us that now we're trying to tell you not to speak about race, or if you do speak about race, here's the way you're supposed to do it. I find that offensive. So that was the main reason why I joined the lawsuit.
Excellent. If we can get sort of like into the weeds, into the nuts and bolts here, I know there's a lot of union folks here, and I know that there's a strong sentiment that unions, that I've heard from you, I've heard from others, that like unions are in many ways our strongest tool in addressing this kind of legislation. Can either of you just speak to, like, give me some nuts and bolts, like in your unions, how does that happen? Are you creating specific caucuses? Are these like related to, are you saying this is a violation of our contract in one way or another? Is it just that the union is this active space already? What is it about unions that make them such an important space? And what is it about, particularly with the really uneven landscape of where professors, adjuncts, visiting professors, graduate students are unionized? What is it about that space specifically?
Well, I think there's two levels, Sarah. I mean, there's many, but I'll just, I think about two. One is a community base, community and labor organizing. And so earlier, Sharon and I were talking about these, the teach-ins that we participated in, and that the teach-in that we organized at the University of Florida involved members of the community, student organizations. It was organized. All of the faculty organizers were also faculty union members, people who felt safe to organize a teach-in on a quote unquote controversial topic because we have the protections of the collective bargaining agreement. And there's also a power in numbers. Being in a labor union allows us to do things like say, hey, the Rutgers colleagues went out on strike, the grad students, the adjuncts, let's support them. Right now, we can cut a check. All we got to do is meet together, and we can act on a dime pretty quickly. There's many other organizations. Our union has supported affordable housing initiatives in our county. We've supported raising the minimum wage. We've stopped when the COVID pandemic first came out. Really, it was clear it wasn't like a 1 week thing. The first thing that our university did, I don't know why they did this, Sharon, they said, oh, well, we may have to talk about furloughs and temporary layoffs. And because our union has some resources, we just called their bluff, and we ordered an audit. And lo and behold, it turns out that our finances are really good. We thanked our administration for making wise investments. And it turned out we didn't have to furlough or lay off any staff or faculty. It turned out we didn't really need to raise tuition for our students. And so a union, a community-based union, I think, is always looking out not just for its members, but for the good of the broader community. In a more narrower sense, though, we do have a collective bargaining agreement, and we are responsible to defend and protect our members. We have 34 articles, and I mentioned Article 10, our academic freedom article. But we also have articles that really guarantee a transparent tenure and promotion process. We're a university in the Jim Crow South. Let's be real. We were not born, well, actually, let's be even realer. I mean, this nation wasn't born with academic freedom. Academic freedom is a relatively recent concept in the law. I just did a panel a few weeks ago with the constitutional and academic freedom expert who retired from our university, Clay Calvert. And what was fascinating to me about his presentation was he says, within the law, academic freedom is really, it's murky. Does it exist? Does it not exist? And so I kind of used that as a historian to say that Well, yeah. I mean, Harvard University wasn't founded with academic freedom. It was founded as a institution chartered by the Crown, as most early campuses were in this country. And it's really struggles, generations of struggles by faculty, whether or not they were in unions or not, through organizations like the American Association of University Professors that really established this idea of academic freedom, academic integrity. Many of the cases that we have in our union, Sarah, in terms of directly answering your question, involve defending our members. We might have to file a grievance to defend them during their tenure and promotion process. We want to make sure those processes are fair. And again, because of our history, because we were founded as an all-white, all-male, all-Protestant institution, that's always going to be the history of this place. And it's always going to be a struggle to make sure we don't revert back to the origins of the University of Florida. And the origins, again, it's a racist institution. The resources of this university came about no different than the resources of the University of Michigan, Wisconsin, all the other land grant institutions, settler colonialism, expropriation and genocide of Native peoples. And so all the things we do now, all the struggles that we're involved with are historical in that sense.
Great. I really appreciate that. So there's been a couple of, can you guys also speak to, and then I'm going to sort of transition to the questions from the audience, how the specific conditions in Florida compare to, influence, illuminate those happening nationally? There's been a lot of talk in the chat, and Dr. Austin, even your statement that people were like, well, why don't you just go somewhere else? As if these things are not happening in other locations. And then there's, I think that there's that happening. And then there's also seems to be a bit of a feeling from folks who are maybe in, are like blue bubbles that, well, that's happening over there and I want to do something to help, but I'm not quite sure what. So that was like a lot of different things in the same question, but can you just speak to how the conditions in Florida compare with those nationally and how that influences how you're thinking about this?
Well,
Dr. Austin, you want to start it?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start. I really do think, and we were even just talking about this in class today, I think that a lot of what's happening in Florida and around the nation is a response to the changing demographics in this country. I think that there are some people who are just terrified. And if you notice that the immigrants are always the scapegoats, they're the bad guys. And it's almost as if some people are terrified and they really do believe that with immigrants, that there's going to be, I guess, when whites are in the minority officially, is going to be a case in which people of color are going to just oppress all the white people. And I think that's something that I don't think people even believe it. I don't know if they do or not, but I think that's what they want certain people to believe. So a lot of the things that you're seeing that are attacking educators, not just here in Florida, but just all around the nation, I think a lot of that is the response to the fact that there are new people on these college campuses who are, when you think about a professor, if you were asked the question, what does a professor look like? You probably wouldn't say that that person looks like me. And in my class today, we were talking about what's been happening in Tennessee, which is my home state, with the Tennessee Three, with the two African-American men who were expelled from the legislature because they, were involved in protests against, in favor of reform and gun safety, and they were expelled. And I was telling my class that as someone who interned for the Tennessee legislature when I was in grad school, I saw the behavior of some of the legislators and the things that they used to do. And I'm like, and they expelled those two men for that? I'm like, I mean, when I was there, now this was way back in like the late 80s, but I'm like, I mean, I saw some of everything. And I think even with that situation, although it's not exactly the same as what we're dealing with here with the academic freedom thing, but I think even with that, it's a response to, one of the young men was saying that they're not used to seeing people who look like him in that type of space. And the same is true in academia. They're not used to seeing people who look like me and Paul in this space. Or even if you don't look like me and Paul, if you have like an ideology that's more progressive, usually college campuses throughout history have not been progressive. If anything, they've been the complete opposite of that. And I really do think that what's happening here and around the nation is just a response to people having like this paranoia and this fear about the changing demographics and the belief that all these scary liberals are going to just, overtake everything and destroy the country. And I think that's kind of what, and really, I don't even know if you could even blame all of that on Donald Trump, because I think it was around even before him, but I don't think he helped matters any. And so I think that what we're seeing is just it's an example of that, just people just having this fear about the changing demographics. And I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
I think that's crucial. Thank you so much. Dr. Ortiz, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I was looking for updates on what's been happening, and there's so many things that folks can do. I've been dropping some links in the chat bar. This link that I just dropped is Justice for the Tampa 4. And so this fight back that's been going on, students and members of the community have been increasingly speaking up against this creeping fascism in Florida, and the cops have made it clear what side they're on. And so there's been a lot of arrests that have been happening recently. Some of you may be familiar, have heard about the case of the Tampa 4. These were 4 younger activists who were protesting against HB 999 and all the terrible things we're talking about tonight, and were unfairly arrested and incarcerated. There's a defense fund in support of them, and I just put that in the chat bar. The thing I really, again, want to kind of emphasize is the fight back that's been going on, but also something that Professor Austin just said. And I was looking at the chat bar earlier, Sharon, and our colleagues, Sonia Hernandez asked this question about Hispanic serving institutions and what we can do to promote these things that DeSantis doesn't want us to promote, and that is diversity. And the fact that a person you can take a course at UF with a professor like Sharon Austin, who's an African-American, brilliant woman intellectual, who has these incredible books, who carries herself, who's a recognized great scholar in the US and beyond, and also serves as a role model. I mean, for me as a first generation college student, being able to see people like Sharon Austin, being able to see people like Larry Trujillo at the University at UC Santa Cruz, Carlos Munoz at UC Berkeley, Chicano veterans who were just really carried themselves in such a way that I wanted to emulate. And I would think, wow, it is so cool to see them there. And then we also we still run up against colleagues, unfortunately, who don't want us there. And Sharon and I have worked with graduate students of color who have been told point blank, you don't belong here. And they come right to us. They come to Sharon, they'll come to me sometimes and say, I had this terrible interaction with a professor who said, you'll never make it in academia. You don't have what it takes. And I feel that that's why what we do is so very important. And it's something that I was blessed to learn from people like Cedric Robinson, who would sit us down individually and tell us, look, these institutions were not made for you. They were not made for me, but we can create spaces for first generation students, like I know Sonia Hernandez is doing where she's at. And I know a lot of the colleagues here in the chat bar are doing, and we got to keep these spaces open. I mean, yeah, they're small, and they're in capitalist institutions. Let's be clear, we are in settler colonial capitalist institutions. But at the same time, these are vital core spaces in Black studies programs, Chicano studies programs, labor studies programs. We've got to keep these spaces open. And if they were not important, then the man wouldn't be trying to shut us down, right?
Great.
I
And
had to make a gesture to the 60s.
Sorry. And thank you for bringing in Sonia's question, which I do think is a really vital one, right? Because here's this, we have to both think big about what this sort of what these fights mean on a existential level. And then anyone who's ever been in, you know, in a fight will tell you, you got to be strategic too. And you're like trying to figure out what are the specific things that we can do. So, you know, thank you, just Sonia, for throwing out the HSI. And I think that like it's really useful to brainstorm and think about these sort of different strategic tactics and what are also like the structures that exist that can help us. But I'm going to use that to pivot to ask some of the audience questions. So we have a question that is about, okay, I assume none of us here are like Freudians on the real deep level, but we do have this question about sort of what is motivating DeSantis. Is this just about like a will to power, or is, yeah, what is motivating DeSantis? And I guess, you know, how is that motivating other politicians who are also taking on this kind of campaign?
Well, I think what's motivating him is pretty obvious. He's running for president. He wants to be president. But, you know, I don't think that's all of it. I think he really does believe the things that he says. And I think that, you know, with his type of ugly politics, he really does think that it's going to benefit him. It's not going to backfire. I think that's what he's thinking. But I don't agree with that, because I think it is going to backfire. I think he already has seen signs that it already has. I would really be shocked if our case that challenges HB7, if it didn't come out in our favor, because so far we've got the preliminary injunction. It's been upheld at the appellate level, and they haven't handed down a decision overall about the merits of the law, but I'm expecting them to basically invalidate it and to find it unconstitutional. But I think what motivates him is just, he seems like he has this huge ego. He's very overly sensitive. He's the kind of person you can't criticize. He openly retaliates against people. So I'm really wondering, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but I'm really wondering, I mean, if there's something going on. I mean, the only word I can think of to describe him is like a narcissist, or I mean, it's got to be something like that, because running for president is one thing, and I think that's his ultimate goal. But I really do think that he believes that he's doing some good and trying to promote this.
Thanks.
And we
Any
have
guesses,
this,
Paul?
yeah, I mean, we do have, yeah, I'll kind of take I'll take a pass on the Freudian analysis, as brilliant as that is. But I think that Florida is just, as one of my students said in my labor history class this afternoon, Florida is just an exaggerated United States, or an exaggerated version of the United States, right? And the things that DeSantis and Abbott and these powerful think tanks like the Manhattan Institute, the Koch network, a certain segment of the US ruling class are trying to ban. I mean, let's think about it for a moment. Critical race theory gives us the tools to not only understand oppression and how oppression is created, but how to fight oppression. Gender studies gives us the tools to understand how oppression is created, and also how to understand that gender is a social construct. And it also gives us the critical tools we need to dismantle heteronormativity, right? The way that critical race theory gives us the tools to take racism and sexism and classism head on and fight those things. It's clear that people like Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump and all their supporters in Congress and in corporate America and the US Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, don't want us to have these tools. They want us as consumers. They want us to go shopping. You know, they want us to support their wars. But it's no mistake that if you look at the work of people like Angela Davis, Bell Hooks, Robin Kelly, many of the scholars who were banned in the AP African American Studies curriculum in Florida, they're also prominent anti-war activists. They're prominent, they're people who fight against the idea of incarceration. You know, I'll mention two scholars here that I really would encourage folks to read about the current crisis. You know, one is Ruthie Gilmore's brilliant book, Golden Gulag. And Professor Gilmore's analysis in the 70s in California, how as the society, the ruling class begins to dismantle manufacturing and realizing, hey, we can make a much bigger profit in banks, in prisons. Let's move to that. That's what Golden Gulag is about. Or more recently, one of Professor Gilmore's students, Jordan Camp, Incarcerating the Crisis, another necessary book in understanding the moment that we're in. Why does the US have the largest per capita incarcerated population in the world? That's very connected to the crisis that we're in now of neoliberalism. And it's just a continuation in some ways of that crisis. And it turns out that, but in the midst of the crisis, the exciting thing is that you have these brilliant intellectuals like Bell Hooks, like Angela Davis, like Toni Morrison, who can get to the bottom, the roots of our oppression collectively in an intersectional manner and help us figure out how to get out of those weeds, how to fight those things. And these are the things that Governor DeSantis wants to ban. He wants to stop these discussions about how your oppression is rooted to my oppression and how maybe we should get together instead of being separate. He wants to stop those things, but he isn't the only one that wants to stop those things, right?
Okay. Well, I think that's like just a real to go out on a mic drop, I believe is the technical term. But I am going to ask, so, it's approaching I just want to say, two things. Would both of you mind sort of giving your closing statement, right? Like, what do you want people to sort of leave and take with them? Obviously, there's a ton of incredible links and observations and ideas in the chat. This video has been recorded. I believe it's being live streamed, so it's something you can return to. But would you both sort of give us your closing thoughts, and also, if people would like to get in touch with you or involved in this work, where might you send them?
I'll just end by saying one of my favorite quotes is, "Freedom isn't free." And we have to understand that even though this is 2023 and we're dealing with things that you would think would be happening in 1963, freedom isn't free, and we have to always keep up the fight. And one of the things that I wanted to also briefly mention, someone asked, what can you do to help? It's very important to support those civil rights groups. And also it's very important to make sure that we support our students, because as faculty, we are all concerned about what's going on. But I really do worry sometimes about how the students are dealing with this, because this has major impacts for them as far as even the accreditation of our schools. If HB 999 becomes law, so that's going to cause a lot of stress for them, and that's definitely not something we want. And then to answer your second question, you can find me online. You can find me on Twitter, Sharon Austin. You can just look at my website, and if you have any questions.
Awesome. Paul, take us home.
Well, I don't know, because this is an unfolding story. I don't want this to be, the end, as any good story, just never has really a conclusion. I think that the struggle is ongoing. We're not going anywhere. Sharon alluded to this earlier. There's a kind of a pride now in being a faculty unionist in the state of Florida. When we're outside of the state, I kind of find myself carrying myself in a certain way. When people are like, oh my gosh, you're in Florida, how can you take it there, right? But we're being, early on in this crisis, it was interesting. People were saying, what can we do to help you? We really feel bad about what's happening in Florida. But increasingly, we're finding out that people are calling us now to ask for our advice. And they're saying, like, y'all aren't going away. How are you doing it? How are you holding together? And I think that's the takeaway I would give, or kind of, closing thoughts, is we need to be there for each other. If a student, a parent, a teacher, especially K through 12 teachers, are suffering so much harassment, librarians are suffering harassment. One of the exciting things that I'm hearing about is people now are stepping up to support teachers, and they're holding like banned, if they find out that a book is being planned to be banned at a school board meeting, show up at the school board, support the librarians, support the teachers. And one of the things, and this is going to be for my fellow, academic colleagues, is that we need also to look at ourselves in the mirror. and do some work on our own selves. And one of the things I want to mention is that this academic culture where we kind of wait to say things meaningful and or controversial until we get tenure needs to stop, like yesterday. Because, and I heard it when I was a grad student, and I participated in it too. And the reason it needs to stop is that as long as it continues, what you're doing is you're essentially relying on a very small group of people to speak out on your behalf, right? And so it shouldn't always be up to Sharon Austin. It shouldn't always be up to Angela Davis to speak out. We all need to speak out. And that's the main struggle that we're having now, I think, is we're getting a few victories, but we're still not speaking out enough. That's what I want to kind of close out with, is the need to speak out, the need to support each other, support those striking workers at Rutgers University right now. That's a critical struggle. And we will gain, if you ask me right now, like, what can you do to help people in Florida? My thing is support Rutgers. The strikers at Rutgers is the best thing you can do right now, this moment, to support us in Florida, because if they win, we win. If they lose, we lose.
That's incredible. Okay, I want to thank both of you so very much. Can we have a big digital round of applause for the generous, kind, so very smart, wonderful Dr. Sharon Austin and Paul Ortiz. I'm just going to close you out by saying, if you would like to get in contact with Historians for Peace and Democracy, you can find us on the website, historiansforpeace.org. Massachusetts Peace Action, I'm going to give you a moment if you want to jump in and plug your stuff as well. Or maybe not. But yeah, just a huge round of applause to both of you. Thank you both so much. You've been so kind and generous, and this has been like a really great opportunity. And everybody have a lovely evening. So thank you all.
You.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you all.